Do you ever sit in silence, staring at the phone, waiting for a call that never comes? Do you find yourself reminiscing about the days when your children would run into your arms, their laughter filling the house, their eyes full of admiration? And now, those same children, the ones you raised with endless love and sacrifice, barely have time to visit. Their lives have become a whirlwind of work, responsibilities, and distractions, and somewhere along the way, you seem to have faded into the background. The distance between you and them isn't just physical, it's emotional. And that hurts. It's an ache that many parents feel as they grow older. A silent heartbreak that comes with the realization that the people you devoted your life to may not need you in the same way anymore. And maybe you've asked yourself, did I do something wrong? You remember the sleepless nights, the sacrifices, the moments when you put their happiness before your own. But now, as they build lives of their own, it feels like you're being left behind. You're not alone in feeling this way. It's a reality faced by millions of aging parents. And the truth is, reacting with anger, guilt, or sorrow won't bridge the gap, it may even widen it. Maybe you've tried to express your feelings, only to be met with dismissive responses like, "Mom, I'm just really busy," or "Dad, I'll call you later." Okay, and later never comes? The frustration builds. The pain lingers. And in the worst moments, resentment begins to take root. But deep down, you don't want to be angry. You just want to understand. You just want to feel valued again. So, how do you navigate this stage of life with dignity, strength, and wisdom? How do you maintain your self-respect without pushing your children further away? How do you find peace when the people you love the most seem to have drifted from you? The answer doesn't lie in demanding their attention, nor does it lie in suffering in silence. Instead, it begins with a shift in perspective. Before we dive into the solutions, let's take a step back and reflect on a powerful truth: impermanence, anicca. In Buddhism, impermanence is one of the fundamental realities of life. Everything changes, relationships evolve, circumstances shift, and the roles we once played are not meant to last forever. Clinging to the past, whether it's longing for the days when your children needed you more or hoping they will return to who they once were, only deepens suffering. But acceptance doesn't mean giving up. It means understanding that happiness and respect don't come from external validation, but from within. The key to peace lies in self-transformation, in embracing your own worth, and in taking wise action. You are not powerless in this situation. You have more influence than you realize, not by forcing change, but by embodying wisdom and strength in a way that naturally draws respect, love, and connection back into your life. Through a combination of modern psychology and ancient Buddhist wisdom, we'll explore 8 powerful insights that will help you restore your dignity, rebuild your purpose, and even repair your relationships, not through conflict, but through a quiet, undeniable transformation that will not go unnoticed. You don't need to demand their love, you just need to reclaim yourself. And in doing so, you may find that everything else starts to shift naturally. So, if you've ever felt ignored, forgotten, or unappreciated, stay with me. Because this journey isn't just about mending relationships, it's about rediscovering the strength, wisdom, and joy that have always been within you. And once you tap into that, respect and love have a way of finding their way back. Let's begin. 1. Do not react in anger. Pause, and reflect. When someone we love turns away, when they no longer seem to hear us, when their attention drifts elsewhere. The pain is unlike any other. It's not just about feeling forgotten, it's about feeling invisible. And when that distance comes from our own children, the ones we nurtured with unconditional love, the ones we sacrificed sleep for, worked tirelessly for, and poured our hearts into, it cuts even deeper. There's an unspoken expectation that love should be reciprocated, that devotion should be acknowledged, that years of care should result in a lifetime of gratitude. But when reality doesn't match that expectation, the disappointment feels unbearable. It's in these moments that emotions take over. The pain turns into frustration, frustration into resentment, and suddenly, without realizing it, we find ourselves consumed by anger. That anger feels justified, even righteous. After all, haven't we earned the right to be upset? Haven't we given enough to at least deserve a little respect? The urge to confront them, to say, how could you do this to me, after everything I've done for you, is overwhelming. But what does anger truly accomplish? We think it will make them listen, that it will shake them into realizing how much they've neglected us. But does it ever really work that way? Does raising our voices bring them closer? Does demanding answers soften their hearts? Or does it only serve to push them further away? Buddhism teaches that anger, dosa, is like clutching a burning coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. It doesn't harm them, but it certainly burns you. And when we allow anger to take over, we lose sight of the bigger picture. We lose control over ourselves, over our peace, and ultimately, over the very relationships we're trying to protect. Mr. Tanaka understood this pain all too well. A retired school teacher, he had spent decades shaping young minds, guiding students, and offering kindness to all who came his way. He was a man who had dedicated his life to others. But as the years passed, he found that his own children, once so eager to share their lives with him, now barely had time to call. And when they did, their voices were distant, their words hurried, their attention elsewhere. Then came the night he decided to call his son, hoping to finally reconnect, to hear his voice without the usual rush. The call went straight to voicemail. He tried again. Still no answer. And just like that, the frustration boiled over. 1,000 thoughts ran through his mind. Does he even care? Am I just an afterthought? Why is it so hard to pick up the phone for 5 minutes? His first instinct was to call again, to demand explanation, to let his son know just how much he was hurting. But something made him pause. Instead of calling back, he grabbed his coat and stepped outside. The night air was crisp, the world around him still. He walked aimlessly, his thoughts still racing. But as the minutes passed, his mind began to clear. He found himself in a nearby park, the same one he used to take his children to when they were little. The memory of their laughter, their tiny hands holding his, the warmth of their presence, it all came rushing back. And then, in that quiet moment of reflection, he had a realization. His worth was not measured by how often his children called him. His value was not something that could be given or taken away by another person, not even his own son. He was still the same man who had once shaped young minds, who had offered kindness to others, who had lived a life of purpose. That had not changed. And just like that, the weight of his frustration began to lift. The next time his son called, Mr. Tanaka answered with a different energy. His voice was warm, steady, free of resentment. He asked about his son's life, listened without expectation, and let go of the need for an apology. And his son noticed. Over time, their conversations grew longer, more meaningful, not because Mr. Tanaka had demanded attention, but because he had shifted his own perspective. He had chosen peace over anger, understanding over blame. And that change made all the difference. This is the power of reflection. Anger builds walls, but self-awareness builds bridges. When we feel the sting of neglect, the immediate urge is to lash out. But what if, instead, we took a step back? What if we allowed ourselves to pause, to breathe, to recognize that our worth is not defined by how others treat us? The respect we seek from others begins with how we treat ourselves. So the next time you feel the frustration rising, the next time you are tempted to demand answers or react in anger, take a moment. Go for a walk. Breathe deeply. Remind yourself of all that you are beyond being a parent. You are not just someone's mother or father. You are a person with wisdom, experience, and dignity. You are whole on your own. And when you embrace that truth, you will find that peace is no longer something you need from others, it is something you carry within yourself. 2. Rebuild your own life, find new purpose. There comes a time in life when the roles we've played for so long begin to shift. As parents, we dedicate years, even decades, to nurturing, guiding, and shaping our children's lives. And then, almost suddenly, they are grown, they have their own families, careers, and responsibilities. We find ourselves sitting in the quiet of a once busy home, waiting for a phone call, waiting for a visit, waiting for a sign that we still matter. But the longer we wait, the more time slips away, and the silence grows heavier. This waiting becomes a trap. At first, it feels temporary, just a phase, just a busy season in their lives. But then days turn into weeks, weeks into months. We replay old memories, clinging to the past, longing for what used to be. It is easy to believe that our happiness depends on their presence, on their words, on their recognition of all that we have done for them. But the truth is, placing our sense of worth in the hands of others, especially in the hands of our children, is a recipe for suffering. Buddhism teaches that self-reliance, at a higher Tano Natho, is the only true refuge. No one, not even those we love most, can be responsible for our happiness. That is something we must cultivate from within. It is not easy to accept this at first. It may even feel painful, but in reality, it is the most liberating realization of all. Because when we stop waiting and start living, everything changes. Mrs. Elena, a widow in her late 60s, found herself caught in this cycle of waiting. She had spent her entire life as a devoted wife and mother. Her children were her world. And when her husband passed away, she expected that her children would fill that empty space. But they had their own lives. And slowly, the calls became less frequent. At first, she made excuses for them. They're busy. They'll call soon. But soon, the silence stretched longer and longer. She found herself sitting by the phone, scrolling through old photos, aching for the warmth of her children's voices. The loneliness was suffocating. Then, one morning, she woke up and felt something shift inside her. She looked at herself in the mirror and thought, is this how I want to live the rest of my life? Waiting for something that may never come. She decided. In that moment, that she would stop waiting and start doing. She walked into her small backyard, opened an old packet of flower seeds, and began to plant. At first, it was just a distraction, something to pass the time, to keep her hands busy. But as the days went on, something beautiful happened. She found herself looking forward to each morning, checking on her seedlings, watching them grow. She began to feel a sense of purpose again, a quiet joy that had nothing to do with whether or not her children called. She joined a local gardening club, met people who shared her passion, and started growing vegetables to share with her neighbors. And then, something surprising happened. One afternoon, her phone rang. It was her daughter, who had barely called in months. "Mom, you sound so happy these days. What's your secret?" For the first time in a long time, there was no sadness in Elena's voice when she answered. She laughed, telling her daughter about her garden, about the friends she had made, about the simple joy of watching something grow. Her daughter listened, really listened. And from that moment on, the calls came more often, not out of guilt, not out of obligation, but because her daughter genuinely wanted to hear about her mother's life. This is the power of transformation. When Mrs. Elena stopped waiting and started living, her energy changed. She no longer radiated sadness, longing, or need. Instead, she radiated fulfillment. And people, including her own children, were drawn to that. A fulfilled parent is harder to ignore. When we find our own purpose, our own joy, we become magnetic. People want to be around us, not because they feel they have to, but because our energy is uplifting. And even if they don't come back the way we expect them to, it no longer matters in the same way, because we are whole on our own. So the question is, what is your passion? What is something that excites you? Something that brings you joy that isn't tied to anyone else. Maybe it's gardening, like Mrs. Elena. Maybe it's painting, writing, volunteering, or traveling. Maybe it's learning something new, picking up a hobby you never had time for before. The key is to start. Don't wait for someone else to bring joy into your life. Create it. Build a life that is so rich, so full, that even the silence no longer feels lonely. You are not just a parent. You are a whole, vibrant, valuable person with a lifetime of wisdom and experiences. And your life is not meant to be lived in waiting, it is meant to be lived in purpose. 3. Communicate wisely, express. Don't accuse. There's a deep loneliness that settles in when someone we love drifts away. It's not always intentional, but the silence, the distance, the feeling of being left behind, it weighs on the heart. At first, we wait, hoping they'll remember, hoping they'll reach out. But as days turn into weeks, and weeks into months, frustration begins to creep in. And in that frustration, words become weapons. You never call me anymore. Don't you care about me? The intention is to be heard, to make them understand the pain we feel. But accusations, no matter how justified, rarely bring the response we want. Instead of softening hearts, they build walls. Instead of bringing loved ones closer, they push them away. It's human nature. When people feel attacked, they defend themselves. And what could have been a moment of reconnection turns into an argument. Or worse, silence. Buddhism teaches right speech, samabhaka, the practice of speaking with kindness, truth, and purpose. It reminds us that words are not just sounds, they carry energy, intention, and consequences. When we speak from a place of love rather than blame, we create the possibility for healing. And sometimes, healing starts with a single word. Mr. Peterson, a retired carpenter, knew this feeling of distance well. He had always been a devoted father, present in every way, but as his son, James, grew older, their conversations became less frequent. At first, Mr. Peterson shrugged it off. Life gets busy, he told himself. But as time went on, and the calls became fewer and farther between, the doubt crept in. Does he even think about me? Does he even care? One evening, after yet another week of silence, Mr. Peterson sat at the kitchen table, his frustration reaching a boiling point. His first instinct was to call James and say exactly what was on his mind. Do you even realize how long it's been since we last talked? I always made time for you. Why can't you do the same? He imagined the conversation, the defensiveness in his son's voice, the excuses, the tension, and suddenly, he realized something. This isn't the way to bring him back to me. So instead, he reached for a piece of paper, and he began to write. James, I miss our conversations. I miss hearing about your life. I just want you to know that I'm always here. And I'm proud of you. No matter what. There was no blame in his words. No resentment. Just love. A week later, his phone rang. It was James. His son hadn't forgotten him. He hadn't stopped caring. He had just been caught up in the whirlwind of life, unaware of how much time had slipped by. But that letter, those simple words, reminded him of something important, that no matter how busy life got, the love of a father was constant. It's easy to assume that silence means indifference. That if someone doesn't reach out, they must not care. But often, people don't realize how much their absence hurts us, until we tell them. And how we tell them makes all the difference. There's an old Buddhist saying, before you speak, let your words pass through 3 gates. Is it true? Is it kind? Is it necessary? When we communicate with our children, with those we love, we must ask ourselves, is what I'm about to say going to open a door or close one? Is it going to bring us closer or create more distance? Imagine 2 different conversations. In one, a mother tells her son, you never call me anymore. I guess I'm just not important to you. In the other, she says, I was thinking about you today, and just wanted to hear your voice. Both express longing, but one invites guilt, while the other invites connection. When we communicate wisely, we remind the people in our lives that they are welcome, not obligated, to return. Love should never feel like a burden. And when we remove the weight of expectation, we create space for people to show up. Not because they feel they must, but because they truly want to. But what if we've already spoken in frustration? What if the words have already been said? And the walls have already been built? It's never too late to shift the energy. A simple message, a note, even a short phone call can change everything. I know life is busy, but I just wanted you to know that I'm thinking of you. I'm here if you ever want to talk. No anger, no demands, just an open door. Love doesn't disappear just because it isn't spoken every day. And sometimes, the most powerful way to bring someone back into our lives is not to chase after them, not to demand their attention, but to create an atmosphere where they feel safe to return. Your words shape your relationships. Use them to build bridges, not barriers. Speak with love, and love will find its way back to you. 4. Set healthy boundaries, self-respect first. There's a common belief among parents, especially those who have given everything to their children, that love means never saying no. That to be a good mother or father is to be endlessly available, to always put their needs above your own, to sacrifice without question. After all, isn't that what love is? But love without balance, love that asks you to give at the expense of yourself, is not love, it is self-neglect. Respect is a two-way street. If you give endlessly without boundaries, what message does that send? It tells people, especially your children, that your time is not valuable, that your needs don't matter, that you will always be there, no matter how little they appreciate you. And over time, that kind of love doesn't bring people closer, it pushes them away. Because the more we allow ourselves to be taken for granted, the less others see us as individuals with our own lives, dreams, and dignity. Mrs. Rosa learned this the hard way. As a mother, she had always been the type to give. She believed that if she showed up for her son, Daniel, over and over again, he would eventually reciprocate that love. But as the years passed, she began to notice a pattern. Daniel would only call when he needed something. Babysitting, money, a last-minute favor. He would show up, drop off his kids, barely say thank you, and rush off to whatever was more important in his life. And every time, Mrs. Rosa said yes, because she thought that's what a mother was supposed to do. At first, she told herself it was normal. He was busy. He had responsibilities. But deep inside, a quiet resentment was growing. She started to feel less like a mother and more like a convenience, a service he could call on whenever he pleased. And yet, she couldn't bring herself to say no. What if refusing him made him angry? What if he called even less? What if he stopped calling altogether? Then, one day, it happened again. Daniel called, asking if she could watch the kids, this time with no notice at all. She was exhausted, had been looking forward to a quiet day. But the familiar words were already forming in her mouth. Of course, sweetheart, no problem. But this time, something stopped her. A voice inside her whispered, why does your time matter less than his? Why does your rest matter less than his convenience? She took a breath, steadied her voice, and gently but firmly said, Daniel, I love you, but I have plans today. There was silence on the other end of the phone. She could hear the surprise in his pause, the confusion in his hesitation. He had never heard her say no before. For a moment, she worried, was he angry? Would he stop calling altogether? But then, something unexpected happened. He sighed and said, oh, okay, Mom. I'll figure something out. And that was it. The world didn't end. The relationship didn't crumble. And in that moment, Mrs. Rosa realized something profound. Her son was fully capable of handling his own life. He wasn't helpless. He didn't need her as much as he had made her believe. And her saying no wasn't a rejection of him, it was an affirmation of herself. Over time, something shifted. The more she stood her ground, the more Daniel began to respect her. He stopped assuming she was always available, started asking instead of expecting. And gradually, their relationship became one of mutual appreciation rather than one-sided obligation. Buddhism teaches equanimity, upekkha, the practice of balance. of staying centered, of knowing that we are not here to serve endlessly at the expense of ourselves. To love someone fully does not mean letting them walk all over you. It does not mean saying yes when your heart says no. It does not mean abandoning yourself in the name of keeping the peace. Setting boundaries is not rejection. It is self-respect. Think of it like this: if a river had no banks, it would spill over, flooding everything in its path. It is the boundaries of the river that give it direction, that allow it to flow with purpose. Love is the same way. Without boundaries, it becomes chaotic, overwhelming, unsustainable. But with balance, it can flow freely, without resentment, without exhaustion, without the fear of being taken for granted. So ask yourself, where in your life do you need to set a boundary? Where have you been saying yes when your heart has been begging you to say no? Where have you allowed yourself to be treated as an afterthought, hoping that if you just keep giving, one day they'll appreciate you more? You don't need to demand respect. You don't need to beg for it. You teach people how to treat you by the way you treat yourself. If you show others that you value your time, your energy, your emotional well-being, they will begin to value it too. And if they don't, if they become angry, or pull away, or try to make you feel guilty for prioritizing yourself, that is their burden to carry, not yours. You cannot control how others react to your boundaries, but you can control whether or not you set them. So the next time you feel yourself about to say yes when you don't want to, pause. Take a breath. Remind yourself that your love is not measured by how much you sacrifice. It is measured by how much you show up for yourself as well. Because when you respect yourself, the world follows suit. 5. Lead by example. Respect is earned. Respect is not something you can force. It does not come from raised voices, from guilt tripping, or from demanding to be acknowledged. True respect is earned, not through words, but through actions, through presence, through the way you carry yourself in the world. People naturally gravitate toward those who exude quiet strength, those who embody dignity without needing to announce it. And when it comes to family, especially our children, they are not just listening to what we say, they are watching how we live. Mr. Lorenzo understood this well. In his younger years, he had worked tirelessly to provide for his family, making sacrifices without hesitation. He had been the kind of father who showed up, who attended school events, who helped with homework, who sat down for dinner every night, and listened to his children's stories. But as they grew older, their visits became infrequent, their phone calls shorter, their presence more distant. He could have demanded explanations, could have reminded them of all he had done, could have expressed disappointment in their lack of attention. But he didn't. Instead, he chose a different path. He continued to live his life with quiet dignity. He took care of himself, maintained his home, nurtured his garden, and kept in touch with his old friends. When his children did visit, he welcomed them with genuine warmth, not resentment. He asked about their lives, truly listening, never using the moment to remind them of their long absence. And most importantly, he never made them feel guilty. He never made them feel that their presence was a duty rather than a choice. At first, nothing seemed to change. The visits were still sporadic, the phone still quiet on most days. But over time, something shifted. His children began visiting more frequently, not because they felt obligated, but because they wanted to. They saw their father not as someone desperate for their attention, but as someone they genuinely enjoyed being around. They saw that he was still full of life, still growing, still finding joy in the world. And that, more than any lecture or complaint, made them want to be part of his life again. Buddhism teaches leadership through virtue, Dhamma leadership, the idea that the best way to inspire others is not to tell them what to do, but to live in a way that makes them want to follow. People respond to energy more than words. A parent who radiates strength, wisdom, and inner peace is far more influential than one who demands attention. When you carry yourself with dignity, people take notice. And when your children see that you are fulfilled, that you are living a life of meaning regardless of their presence, they are naturally drawn back to you. It is human nature to be repelled by obligation and drawn toward inspiration. If a child feels that visiting their parent is simply another responsibility, another box to check, they will find excuses to delay it. But if they see that their parent is someone whose company brings warmth, wisdom, and comfort, they will seek them out on their own. This is why leading by example is so powerful. If you want respect, embody it. If you want kindness, give it freely. If you want deep conversations, be the kind of person who listens without judgment. If you want love, let it flow from you without conditions. And most of all, if you want your children to value your presence, show them that you value yourself first. There's an old Buddhist story about a wise elder who lived in a small village. He never raised his voice, never scolded, never forced anyone to listen to him. Yet people from all around would seek him out, sitting in his company, asking for advice, simply wanting to be near him. One day, a young man asked, "Why do people come to you when you never call for them?" The elder smiled and said, "Because when a fire burns brightly, people are naturally drawn to its warmth. This is the essence of earning respect. Be the fire, be the presence that others naturally want to be around. Live with purpose, with grace, with wisdom. And the people in your life, your children included, will be drawn to you not because they have to, but because they want to." So ask yourself, what kind of energy are you bringing into your relationships? Are you holding on to resentment? Or are you creating an atmosphere where love can grow? Are you demanding respect? Or are you embodying it? The truth is, the way people treat you often reflects the way you treat yourself. If you show the world that you respect yourself, that you value your own time and presence, others will follow suit. Mr. Lorenzo's story is not unique. It is the story of every parent who has ever felt forgotten. Every person who has ever wondered if they still matter. And the answer is simple: you matter when you decide to matter. Not because someone calls you every day. Not because someone visits you out of guilt. But because you live your life in a way that commands quiet admiration. Respect cannot be demanded. It must be earned. And the most powerful way to earn it is not by waiting for others to give it to you, but by becoming the kind of person who commands it effortlessly. Live with dignity. And the world, including your children, will take notice.